عمنا ده.
I'm afraid I think it's entirely irrelevant. I think if they were going to make a resignation of conscience, they should have done that months ago.
Speaking of Egypt Revolution, there's a great book here called Egypt Unshackled, Using Social Media to Bring Down the System by Denis Campbell. He's editor of United Kingdom Progressive magazine, and I have a chance to talk to him on Skype.
Well, as you say, you were just as a journalist collecting events, in live time and tweeting and all. Everybody was tweeting in Tahrir, and it was intriguing for you, I suppose. But you didn't know the extent of all of this.
I really didn't have the full extent of the history. The history came as I began to communicate with people there on the ground, people like Sand Monkey, Al Azul, Sarah NGB, Sarah Siragani, as they began to share information and we developed more of a two-way dialogue on social media, we really began to understand that there was an awful lot at stake there. I'd known a bit about the April 6th movement before I'd started. I'd known a little bit about the death of Khaled Said, and I knew a little bit about the history of the Mubarak regime, but really it was the demonstration following so closely on the heels of what happened in Tunisia that piqued my interest. And as I said to a number of people, like most folks in the media, we were suffering a little bit from revolution fatigue. It had only been 9 days since Tunisia had declared its independence and overthrown Ben Ali, and we all knew there would be a next domino to fall. We just never thought it would be Egypt because of their very strong military power, close ties to the United States, and the iron control of both Mubarak and the Interior Ministry under El Adli. If you look at what's happened in November with that new brand of tear gas that came out, it was very clear by the reactions of the people that there was some sort of a chemical or a nerve agent involved in that, and we've begun to see that. We've also begun to see that here in the United States with the very, very high-grade pepper spray that's been used on the Occupy protesters. So the governments have become much more careful as well as shrewd in the way in which they go about dealing with these things. They've learned their lessons from January and February. They've seen what didn't work, and they've, like any other worthy opponent, have sat down and said, this is what we're going to do to try and fix it.
Events, in the last 10 months or so, all the protests, all the social media, the role it's played is still going on, and tell us a little bit about the changes from the use and the role the social media is playing right now as opposed to January 25th and before January 25th.
Well, during the 18 days of the Egyptian Revolution, January to February, social media was blocked essentially by the government. They managed to shut down the internet, then they managed to put blocks on Twitter. Yet there were so many people in either the hacking community or in other parts of the world that even Google and Twitter themselves formed a organization called Speak to Tweet, where people could pick up the telephone in Arabic, say their tweet and their Twitter address, and somebody would then transcribe it into English, put it out as their Twitter address as well, and say Speak to Tweet on it. They learned to become very adept at sending messages out and moving very quickly and swiftly. I think part of the issue right now is that it's one thing to be successful in a revolution, it's another thing to then successfully govern. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the issue that Egypt is facing right now, is that a lot of the revolutionaries still wanted to maintain that rather loose coalition of people that came together, and they were frankly out-organized by other parties and other organizations inside of Egypt. This is what's happening, I think, in Egypt, is that the extremes on both sides are sort of saying, I either want to see a theocracy on one side or I want to see a complete and total democracy on the other side, without realizing that it's going to take steps to get there. It took the United States 11 years from the time of the end of the Revolutionary War in 1776 until they finally had a constitution in 1787. Now, in that time, they had the Federalist Papers. They had a couple of war skirmishes again between the British. They had a number of issues that went on, as well as internecine warfare in between several of the colonies and several of what would become the states, as to whether the state should have the rights or whether the federal government should have the right. And you're seeing a lot of that unfolding in Egypt. What should the country and the government look like going forward? That's going to continue for some time, and I think people need to understand that, yes, even though you toppled Mubarak in 18 days, it's going to take more than 18 days to sort out the rest of the nation's economic and political infrastructure and bring more fairness and balance. You're seeing the fairness and balance issue come up a lot right now, even in the election for the U.S. president in 2000.
And why traditional media is used by the system and social media used by the so-called revolutionary, and what's dynamic?
Well, the dynamic that's at work here is that he who controls traditional media has the ability to reach a much broader audience within a certain specific area. If you look back over the history of revolutions, the first place that most of the revolutionaries go to is to commandeer and control the airwaves of state television or radio. Whenever you see a dictatorship on the verge of falling, that is the place where everybody tries to go to, because he who can broadcast their demands clearly has a bit of an upper hand at the start. You had Mubarak and his generals as the 1% controlling 40% of all businesses. You had a huge youth unemployment rate, and you had a demographic time bomb ready to explode there in Egypt, where the average age was something like 26 or 27 years of age. All these old people at the top were sitting there controlling the purse strings and basically taking all of the spoils of the economy, while everybody else was left to fend for themselves. And this fundamental inequality, empty stomach, inability to provide for my family, inability to earn more than $2 a day in wages is what was the larger fueling element, even beyond the fact that you had a despotic regime under Mubarak.
You know, I was very surprised, I don't know if this number is correct or not, that the percentage of Egyptians who have access to the Facebook is, it's no more than 5%. Is that true?
That is true. And if you look at the history of media in the Middle East and in Egypt in particular, you started from a situation where you had state television, and that was beamed into households that had television sets. Then you had the internet. The problem with the internet was that the internet required the purchase of a computer as well as a modem or some other means of getting onto the internet. So that ruled out the large, vast majority of the Egyptian population. Then you had satellite television. Actually, satellite television came before the internet. And with satellite television, all of a sudden people could tune in and pick up CNN, could pick up Al Jazeera, could pick up a number of networks and realize that, wait a minute, there's more than just the message that I'm getting from state television. That then led to the internet, which then led to social media. Because of the emergency laws, you couldn't gather anywhere, but you could gather on the internet. And that's what made social media grow. The We Are Khalid Said Facebook page had something like 85,000 followers in a very, very short period of time. And to be able to get those powerful images of his battered corpse out there, and have the police stick to the party line that he died swallowing a marijuana a plastic bag, was absolutely ludicrous. People could see through that visually. Now with social media, because Twitter was designed under the same protocol as the standard text message of most mobile phones, you had the ability with your mobile telephone to control what message was going out. And that was when it was a freeing thing, because everybody has mobile phones, because it's so expensive to run landlines and phones into houses. So that's why social media played such a huge role, because it put it in their hands via their cell phone, into every Egyptian, the ability to communicate and communicate quickly.
How do you see the role of social media in the post-Arab Spring time? I know nothing is going to always be satisfactory to anybody, but visualize the social media not in shackling things, but shackling things and building things.
Well, I think social media can play a huge role in people rallying around common causes. If it wants to build a school in a community, then you can actually bring people around. In the instances of a place where there's been a disaster, such as Fukushima, Japan, or Haiti, or whatever, social media helps people to communicate almost instantly, and it raises more money faster than any other form of media out there. The new timeline, just within the last 24 hours, you're seeing a tremendous amount of emphasis on tell us your story and tell us what's gone on in your life from the time you were born until now. You're going to see the old ancient oral tradition of storytelling taken to a new level with this. People will ask and will want to know, Grandpa Campbell, were you involved in the Egyptian Revolution and what happened? And well, let me show you. And you'll be able to hold up your handheld device or your iPad and play a video or show them what happened, and you'll hear from the voices of the people that were there. So we're much more involved in the history than we were before, where we had to read it many years later in a parchment textbook.
Some people will kind of leery or a little bit worry about the control that social media might have on our social life and our culture. When you see Facebook has 800 million people or more, or that and that, and those people also in a way they are the new big brother, like we are one nation under Google. What are the fear of the big brothers when it comes to social media?
I think it's a very, very good thing to fear and have a healthy amount of skepticism towards. I have a friend who's in Hong Kong who's been sharing with me information about various ways and means in which you can shield your IP address and drop off the grid. Those that were involved in the Tor project, T-O-R, that were using highly encrypted cell phones as well as highly encrypted Macintoshes and laptop computers, know how to take themselves off the grid so their location cannot be easily tracked. I think this aspect of Big Brother is something that's very worrying to a lot of civil libertarians, and it should be worrying to people everywhere. I had collected probably about 9,000 tweets of my own over the course of that period of time that had been sent out. Some, of course, were merely just replies to others, but most of them were communications directly with people on the ground, other members of the media, and in most instances I was a conduit so that I was able to provide information and links back to folks in the United States and other parts of the world who didn't have access to Al Jazeera or BBC Online or some of the other sites out there.
I know your book was focusing on how the social media, or the role the social media plays in unshackled a dictatorship or a brutal regime. Now we see the new system, the military, SCAF, or whoever, they are using the traditional media.
Tweeting is not just about 140 characters. Tweeting is about those characters, the YouTube videos, the pictures that are taken from the cameras of individuals out there. And everybody with a cell phone is a journalist in their own right, because they're telling the story and showing the story in their own words.
And what is when we have a professional journalist, we know the criteria they go by, the oversight and all that. Citizen journalism, what controls that, and how reliable that is?
Well, that is an issue, and it was an issue during the 18 days. I have to tell you that I would often need a second confirming source unless I was taking directly from, say, somebody like The Guardian, somebody like Al Jazeera, etc., who were professional news organizations. I had a number of people tweeting me saying, we're being attacked on such and such a street, send out a tweet, get the media to help us. And I'd have to say respectfully, unless I have some confirming background, I need to know more. The best tool as a journalist I or anyone has is our ability to discern, to cut through and look at what's really important. And with social media, we have to be careful.
واحد دي هناك